For more on UFC 310, let us say hello. The ban is over. The ban is over. The 14-year ban has officially come to an end. Old school fans will remember this. We're going back to Montana. We were there yesterday. Eric Bischoff was joining us from the airport. Montana's own, the pride, dare I say, of Montana, the mayor, perhaps, of Montana. The great Ben Fowlkes of uncrowned.com joining us, as well as the patron saint of the Emerald Isle, Mr. Petesy Carroll, for a little UFC 310 roundtable. There they are. Hello, Ben. Your hair has changed dramatically since you were last on this program.
Well, you know why that is? It's because I've been like Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Prison, writing a letter a week trying to get this ban lifted. I've got online petitions going. There are, tens, some would even say 20s of fans out there who I know have been pestering you to lift the ban. I'm glad you finally listened to the will of the people and stopped the tyranny and allowed me back on this show.
We are back. We actually go back to even the MMA-rated radio days. That's for the real old heads out there. So it's great to have you back in the mix. And, of course, great to have Petesy here for a little UFC 310 discussion. What's going on, Petesy? Very high up with the shirt there. Is this a preview of the what's
it's a good look.
Have you hurt your neck? What is that? Is that a
like
neck brace?
Yeah,
what
it looks
is
like
happening?
I only got this today. It's one of these Franz Beckenbauer tops Adidas make. And the weird thing about it is it's like, maybe just have a really short neck. Maybe GC would fit this thing perfectly with his long giraffe-like neck, but it's not really working, is it? Let's be honest. I'm just looking at myself for the first time.
No, you look fantastic. You look amazing. All of you. Everyone looks great.
What happens if you zip it up all the way?
Yeah, you should.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Oh my God,
it's like a turtleneck.
Yeah, dude, I think you just have a short
Can
neck.
I do the rest of it like this?
You mean whatever floats your boat?
No, I'll do it. I relieve myself. Go ahead.
All right, let's get into it. 310, I was just talking about Kai Asakura. Ben, your thoughts. Obviously, it's a thing now. It's fait accompli. This isn't necessarily a fight week topic, if you will. It's maybe a topic when the fight gets announced. But you've been around for a long time. Putting Asakura as a debutant in a title fight, which ends up being the main event. Of course, that wasn't the original plan. Original plan was Belal versus Shavkat. We know what happened there. You like the idea on the UFC's part?
I do. I like it for a lot of the reasons that you pointed out. For one thing, I think it does tell you something that you don't hear basically anyone else at flyweight being like, hey, this sucks, man. This doesn't make sense. This guy doesn't deserve this yet. All of those guys, they know who he is. They've been watching him, and they're like, yeah, no, I see why when you sign that guy, you would put him right into a title fight. I also like that this is something the UFC used to try to do a little bit more, was go outside the organization and get established championship level talent from other organizations. They haven't done that much of that, in part because just the MMA ecosystem is different, but also because they've preferred to sort of build people up on their own through the Contender Series and all that kind of stuff, and just sort of like homegrown talent up the ranks. I like seeing them go out there, get a guy. I also think you're right. They've done a good job of storytelling around Kai Asakura because, yeah, if you don't have a ton of his fights you can show, but you do have home video of his brother trying to take his head off with head kicks in a parking lot in the middle of the night, yeah, you work with that. And I think they've done a really good job of working with that.
And it would be gigantic for the Japanese market to have a product of that scene, a former Ryzen bantamweight champion become champion. Certainly, it's been a while since, maybe the Yushin Okami days and a couple others, Horiguchi fighting for the belt back in the day against DJ. Your thoughts, Petesy, on the decision to put Asakura in a title fight?
Yeah, I really like that. And based on your statistical breakdown of his YouTube figures earlier, I mean, how could they overlook this guy, really, with those YouTube numbers?
Wow. But, are you mocking? I mean, those were my numbers, by the way. Those were all Andrew's, okay? So take it up.
Fantastic. I will say I like his vibe. I know you're against watching Embedded, but I like to do a deep dive just to make up for that blind spot that you often have with the UFC products. Fantastic vibes this week on Embedded. Seems like very chill guy leading up to this massive moment. And I like the unknown of him. Like I watched this guy fight in Ryzen, and this isn't a direct comparison, but I always felt like, I was watching the events for MMA fighting, and I'd cover them because it was on a decent hour for me. Sometimes the UFC pay-per-view would end and Ryzen would start, and you'd just be going all night watching fights. But I always felt he had the vibe of like a cult following. I can remember Casey Lydon telling me that he he got famous via YouTube, like in this kind of, I think it was called The Outsiders or something, that his brother and him used to compete on, and he really had a Nick Diaz kind of vibe to him within that promotion. I really like what he brings to the table. I like the unknown element of it. The guy can crack. He's going to have a big sizable height advantage over Pantoja, so I'm really excited for it, actually.
By the way, very chill guy reference. Is that a reference to the meme, the dog with his hands in his pockets, or?
Like, you're too cool for me. I don't know what any memes, so maybe.
That's
I don't know,
crazy
maybe
that
I
you
picked
just
it up.
Ben. You know the one I'm talking about, right? You're up to speed with the memes.
I mean, I'm up to speed. I thought I was up to speed with the memes until now. Maybe Petesy, he can't get it because he's busy watching Embedded, so you don't have to. He's got to know who's picking up their luggage at the baggage claim.
That's right.
Has Kai Asakura, has he gotten a haircut yet this week, Petesy? We got to get that.
No haircuts yet, Ben, but we're looking forward to seeing if that develops later on in the week. He did have food, though, which I think is an important theme throughout Embedded episodes.
Wow. GC, for sure, you know about the chill guy, right?
Yeah, I'm chronically online. Of course, I've seen the Chill Guy.
That's
it's,
right.
I mean, it's been beat to death.
Yeah, I thought that's what he was referencing.
No, yeah, I don't need to see any more of that.
Okay.
No, I genuinely meant he's a chill guy. He seemed like the vibes are fantastic with him. That's all I'm saying.
All right, Ben, if you're the UFC, Pantoja hasn't had many opportunities to fight back home. He did fight back in May. You're always looking for that Brazilian champion. You got Pereira. We thought he'd be on that card. You prefer him winning, or do you secretly prefer having a Japanese champ? What do you think they want?
I think that they'd prefer a Japanese champ because, for one thing, it's history, right? I mean, you haven't had a Japanese champ in the UFC if you don't count Sakuraba's win in the Ultimate Japan heavyweight tournament. Which, for people who haven't gone back and watched that, you should. It's just weird enough to be delightful. But you've had a couple people who seem like they could be close that came out of the Japanese scene, never quite got there. If you finally do get one, you can say, hey, it's history, and hey, it's also a new market that the UFC has kind of struggled to break into. They'd like to. Having a guy who can headline pay-per-views for you in Brazil, if you're the UFC, you probably feel like that's not going to be something that is forever in short supply. So I don't know. I mean, I think the UFC typically does a pretty good job of making fights where they can work with whoever wins. Sometimes they might have a slight preference for somebody over the other. But I think if you get Kai Asakura coming out of this, he shows up on the scene, wins a UFC title, makes history in his first UFC fight, I think that there's a lot you can do with that.
I said earlier, Petesy, that I feel like this card is maybe missing that like A+ super main event. But the whole thing top to bottom is tremendous and feels a little old school. It feels like Spike TV days where every single fight on the card has familiar names, some interesting story attached to it, stakes, etc. Dare I say, people's main event, which, of course, a term we coined. You could look it up, Urban Dictionary, myself, New York Rick are there. So everyone trying to steal it, just pay your respects. I think the people's main event is Ian Machado Garry versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. We had Ian on yesterday. We had Shavkat on today. Shavkat, a little cheeky reference to, tapping him out in sparring. I thought Ian was fantastic yesterday. I thought he was fired up. You've been covering him from the jump. You were telling me about him before anyone knew who Ian Garry was. Your sense of what you are feeling, what you saw from Ian, especially yesterday and leading up to this fight.
Well, I think I got shit on from a great height when this fight was first announced, and I said Ian Garry has a very, very viable chance of winning this fight. Initially, when this came out, I think a lot of people, and we know that Ian Garry has been quite a polarizing dude with the fan base online. I think a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, he's finally gonna get his comeuppance." And look, I completely understand that Shavkat is a remarkable fighter, and he's absolutely brilliant, and I understand that he's boogeyman of the division. But to simply write off Ian Garry here would be silly. To be honest, the guy knows how to win, and that's one of the most important things in this sport. And I really feel as though if he can keep this guy at distance, something he couldn't do against MVP because that's where he excels, if he can keep this fight at distance and point score his way to victory, he absolutely can do that. The problem I think he's going to have is that, unlike the MVP fight, he can't take him down. I don't think he can grapple this guy and mix up his game up to that extent, because Shavkat, as we've seen, is very gifted with submissions. He can kind of pluck them out of nowhere. As he's referenced on your interview, he has, well, according to him, he has previously submitted Ian Garry in training as well. I think it's a really, really compelling fight. But I think if this fight is going well for Ian Garry, it's not a particularly exciting one. And I think that will win the ire of some fans, even if he does come away with this amazing victory over Shavkat Rakhmonov, who hasn't been beaten in 18 fights.
fun little twist. Ian announcing today, Ben, on his YouTube channel that his pal Charles Oliveira will be in his corner come Saturday night. So we've seen that relationship develop. Considering some of the, I don't know, criticisms, whatever the shots that Ian has taken for whatever reason over the last year or so, were you surprised when he took this fight on short notice? Yes, he was preparing for another 5-round fight a week later against Buckley. All due respect to Buckley, Shavkat, bit of a tougher test, I would say, right now for someone like Ian. Were you surprised that he, walked the walk and took the fight, talked the talk?
Not really. I think it makes sense for him because especially you think about what it means right now if you go in there and you get a win over Joaquin Buckley versus what it means to go in there and get a win over Shavkat. I mean, people know that I've been on the Shavkat train for a while. That boy good. I think it's a really, really tough matchup for Ian Garry. And so that makes the stakes so much higher, especially if you win, because if you can pull that one off when everybody thinks that you're in way over your head, you force them to take you seriously. Ian Garry has surprised me already to this point. He's turned out to be better than I thought he would be. I do agree with Petesy that I think that the path to victory for him in this one does not necessarily mean an exciting fight. I think the tough part for him is, do you still get to decide where the fight takes place against a guy like Shavkat? Because that has been one of the ways that Ian Garry has really excelled so far in the UFC, is he's gotten to decide in most of these fights what kind of fight it is, what range it takes place at, and what it looks like. And Shavkat has denied that to everybody. Shavkat is sort of just like a bigger Marab in that sense, where he just goes out and does exactly what he does every single fight. And nobody's been able to stop him. And nobody's been able to even come close to stopping him. He has not been in a fight that has looked competitive. So that's why it makes it such a tall task for Ian Garry. Hey, and if you think you're going to be world champion, if you think you're close to being there, why not step up and take this one? You win this one, and you are immediately in that title conversation.
Is this the turning point, PT? If he pulls this off, like I was saying this afterwards, and I was feeling this sentiment from the fans, like they're like, "Damn, I'm kind of digging Ian now. Like I'm finally coming around on him." And again, I think a lot of the heat that he receives, for lack of a better word, somewhat unfair and unwarranted. That all said, he goes out there, beats Shavkat, hands him his first loss. I mean, dare I say, if he stops him as well as he is insinuating he can, and is now talking about 85, and we'll get to that, down the line. There's a lot that needs to happen before that happens. I mean, even as we're talking now, Khamzat Chimaev tweeting to Ian Garry, "You're too skinny, kid. Don't go near the wolf's teeth. You'll end up without a head," with a smiling emoji. He's in the crosshairs of these guys. If this could shake out the way he is saying it will shake out the next couple fights, do they finally, turn and start supporting him and backing him as one of the greats in the sport right now?
I think like you can't deny his ability. Like, I mean, if you're denying his ability at this stage, you don't know what you're looking at. So if people want to do that after this fight, if he wins it, like, that would be purely ridiculous. But this is a personality-driven sport. A lot of people voicing their takes online and stuff like that. I don't know. Like, I mean, this fan base can flip on a dime. I can remember watching Leon Edwards being booed in London when he fought Gunnar Nelson, a dude from Iceland. And then when he won the title, as you remember with the show we were doing, we had people calling in tears, grown men in tears, because this meant so much to them. This sport can flip. Sport is forgiving anyway. People love winners. You can look through the history of sport and see guys, Tiger Woods, even Tyson Fury at one stage, people who are like, "Oh, well, this guy's finished." People find forgiveness for winners, and not that Ian needs to be forgiven for anything with the stuff that people were targeting for, but even if you're denying him at this stage in terms of his ability, you don't know what you're looking at. Like, this is an incredibly good fighter. Losing to Shavkat Rakhmonov does not throw that out the window. He still is. He's fantastic. He's the best fighter we've seen in Ireland in a very long time, since McGregor, certainly. I just don't think Irish people relate to him in that way. And obviously, with everything that's going on with Conor at the moment, I think MMA is in a poor spot. I don't think Irish people, casual sports fans, are willing to welcome a new MMA star into their hearts, because McGregor casts such a large shadow over it. But, one thing is for sure, this guy can fight. I think he's capable of getting a win. Does that mean I'm picking him to win? I don't know. I'm on the fence right now. I'll probably be back and forth. I can remember I used to do this with you. I'll be talking to you Monday. I'll be like, "It's this guy." Tuesday, it's this guy. I'd honestly think that Shavkat's the favorite for a reason. I think he has tremendous knockout ability, tremendous submission ability. I think Ian cannot touch this guy. He can't get in the pocket with this guy. He can't allow this guy to clinch him. That is very difficult, and it's an incredible amount of discipline he'd have to have for 25 minutes to play the game I believe he'd need to play to win this fight, but I don't think it's impossible.
Okay, so if you're Bilal Muhammad, and I think we all agree that the winner of this fight is fighting Bilal. I mean, there's no one else there. Even if Joaquin knocks out Colby, or even if Colby knocks out Joaquin the following week, if you're Bilal Muhammad, Ben, who are you rooting for? Who do you want to fight in your first title defense?
I'd much rather fight Ian Garry if I'm Bilal Muhammad. Shavkat is scary, honestly, and especially matchup-wise, skill-wise. I think that that's a tough fight for Bilal. I also think if you're Bilal and you're thinking about it from a practical standpoint, right? I've got the UFC title. I've got points on the pay-per-view. I want that first pay-per-view that I have the belt for to be a big one and to draw a big crowd. I think you could probably do more promotionally with Ian Garry than you can Shavkat. I mean, the hardcores know and appreciate what Shavkat brings, but if you're trying to rope in those big pay-per-view buyers, I kind of think Ian Garry will help you there a little bit more, and just be a fight that, if you're Bilal, you could look at Ian Garry, what he's done in his fights, and you can kind of know, here's how I want to approach this. Here's a way in on this fight. If you look at Shavkat, you haven't seen anything that could reasonably be described as a weakness. The guy hasn't even been to the scorecards. So I think that's a much tougher puzzle to solve, and probably with less reward for the champion.
I'm a bit of a sucker when it comes to this stuff. I will say unequivocally, I want to see Tom Aspinall fight John Jones next. Sometime in the next 8 or so months. Let's do it. International Fight Week. It's right there. It's perfect. Everyone wants to see it. Heavyweight title fight. Beautiful. However, yesterday, listening to Ciryl Gane talk about Tom, and, you know, the he said, she said of it all. And obviously we haven't seen Ciryl in a little over a year since his fight against Sergey Spivak. At some point, I feel like that's one that we need to see, because let's be honest, Ciryl is the only guy in the top 5-ish, top 6, if you exclude John, of course, that Tom hasn't fought and already beaten. And so first, let me ask you, Petesy, I think you were there. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were there when he fought Sergey Spivak in Paris, right? Ciryl Gane in his last fight?
No, I wasn't.
No, you off.
No, I only go to Paris for PFL.
Oh, okay, my bad. That's right. You were at the Doumbé fight against Baki. Right. Nevertheless,
much bigger deal.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway, nevertheless, what are you expecting to see here from Ciryl? Because hasn't fought in over a year, already beat Volkov in 2021, in a bit of no man's land at the moment, kind of the forgotten man at heavyweight with all this Pereira, Tom, John Jones stuff. What are you expecting to see from the big Frenchman, who continues to be a huge star over there in France, the face of French MMA? I don't think that there's a huge debate right now. Maybe Doumbé, but he hasn't been as active as far as MMA is concerned over the last few months. What are you expecting to see from Bon Gamin, a.k.a. the French Prince?
Look, I think he's spectacular. I was even on him back in the TKO days when he's 2-0.
Look at you with the TKO reference. Shout out to Quebec's finest. Yes, thank you.
But here's the thing, right? You're talking about the Tom fight, and me and Chuck have a roundtable piece coming out on Uncrowned, and one of the questions he asked me during that was, do you think the winner of this fight will fight for a title? And I think that's, like, Chuck does this. Like, he knows that's a ridiculous question, right? Because my obvious question to that question was, which title are we talking about?
Oh, God.
And that's a serious problem, because we have Tom Aspinall, the interim champion, and John Jones, who will fight him for a gargantuan amount of money. And as I've said on this show and for the last year or so, I think we're hurtling towards an Ngannou v. Jones situation here. I think if you were to fight Tom v. Gane, which is a great fight, an absolutely brilliant fight, it would play out much the way 309 did, where the guy who's not involved, John Jones in that case, will cast a shadow over the event to the point where one of the biggest talking points is about a guy who's not in the octagon. So I think that's a massive issue. And really, when you look at this division, that's the only fight you have to make here. You know, everything else feels awkward because that fight isn't being made. And that's not Ciryl Gane's fault. It's not Volkov's fault. But any kind of take to where does this get them with the title and stakes in general for these fights further up the ladder, I think it's becoming very, very difficult for the fan base to understand what's going on, and even for media to understand what's going on. I think Gane is class. I think him v. Tom is a brilliant fight in terms of France v. England. Tom is the guy who headlined all the shows in England. Cyril Gane's the guy who headlined all the shows in Paris. It's fantastic. If it weren't for the fact that John Jones is still here and it's the biggest unanswered question in the UFC in 2024 and into 2025.
Do you think, Ben, there's a chance that Tom's next fight is against Cyril Gane if he wins and not John Jones?
God, I hate to imagine that sad yet entirely possible reality, right? Because like you, I think John Jones versus Tom Aspinall, this is your chance to maybe make right, if you're the UFC, what went wrong with the ability to book John Jones versus Francis Ngannou. Where you could have booked it, you just would have had to pay more money for it, and you said, you know what, we're making plenty of money just serving up whatever we got. We don't want to set this precedent. I think that's probably going to be a factor in this decision now. John Jones saying, I want to renegotiate for more money, and the UFC is saying, we don't want to let people get it in their heads that you can charge us more money than is on your contract as long as it's a big enough fight. And so while I want to see John Jones versus Tom Aspinall, while it makes sense for everybody, while everybody would make a ton of money and it would just make sense and help you put to bed this problem that you have with two separate heavyweight titles, even though Bruce Buffer is going to say undisputed every single time, I do think that there is a non-zero chance that the UFC just kind of keeps booking Tom Aspinall versus whoever else we got. Which, if you ended up with Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane, it's a good fight. It's not like you're in a disaster zone, but it's not the heavyweight championship of the world, and we know it.
Oh my gosh. It's politics aside, belt aside, I would love to see those two fight, but I would prefer to see it after Tom fights John. Let's say Tom wins and then he fights Cyril, because they're two incredible athletes. They're behemoths. And let's be honest, I remember talking to Cyril after the Spivak fight, and he's like, no, not all that interested. And Tom was trying to get that fight, and then, of course, he gets the interim title. And now Cyril says, we were trying to fight him in March, and we were trying to fight him later in the year, and he was waiting. And so I don't necessarily blame either of them in all of this. I don't think any guy is afraid of the other or ducking the other. It's just a mess of a situation. The best way to sort it out, do John versus Tom. Cyril wins, winner of that fight. And if it is Tom, I don't know if there's a huge desire to see John versus Cyril too, but if it's Tom, I think there is a desire to see that fight somewhere perhaps in Europe, hopefully not in the middle of the night, and everyone wins. Everyone wins.
Tell me this, Helwani. You know the business of this sport inside out. If you're Tom Aspinall's manager, you're telling him you won't entertain any other fight right now other than John Jones.
Of course.
If Cyril Gane wins this fight, if you're anyone near Tom, you're saying, don't even entertain a conversation about this fight.
1,000%.
They said they're getting John Jones done. Let them work. Let the promoter do its job here.
1 gazillion percent. I mean, we're not even entertaining that until, I don't know, August or July.
This time next year.
Yeah, or this time next year. No, honestly. Because that fight is just too massive, and Gane is good. Gane is great, and I'm curious to see how he looks. He seems to be in good spirits. One good sign, I was talking about this with Chiesa before you guys came on, good sign of a card being deep is when we start to see debates about, fight placement on the card. People are upset about Aljamain Sterling fighting on the prelims and perhaps say the Kron Gracie Bryce Mitchell fight getting on the main card. I always find this discussion to be very silly for two reasons. A, they get paid the exact same. And if you're truly an Aljamain Sterling fan, if you're the offended party, if you will, then just be happy that you don't have to pay to watch him fight. You'll get him for free on ESPN or with your ESPN Plus subscription. It's hard to deny, though, or ignore, Ben, the history between Aljamain and the UFC. Do you think this is a little bit of a dig? Do you think this is them trying to diminish him or merely a coincidence?
If this card weren't as deep as it is, I would be willing to assume that was what was going on. But when you look at it, you kind of think about different ways that you could move fights around and what the thinking would be there. I could make an argument for a lot of different situations. I think that when you're looking at how you want to do this, you want to put some fights on the ESPN portion of the undercard that are going to help convince people to stick around. If you have people who are on the fence, they don't know if they want to buy this pay-per-view or not, they're going to watch the prelims on ESPN because it's right there. You want them to be enthralled and engrossed all the way up until the prelim card ends and they go, well, we'll see you on pay-per-view. And you say, I'm having a good time. I don't want to stop. And you go ahead and you click buy on it. That's the thinking there. And then what you have when you start up the pay-per-view, you want to have a couple interesting fights. You don't want people to go to sleep with the first fight on the pay-per-view. So obviously that's where you put my people's main event, Nate the Train Landwehr versus Duo Joy. I mean, I don't know if you guys know this about Nate the Train Landwehr, but if he doesn't lose, he's probably going to win. You whip his ass.
That's a great point.
What happens.
That's a great point.
So,
I didn't think of that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I agree with you that if you look at those guys, and I know fighters are always trying to read the tea leaves, right? And be like, where do I stand with the promotion? They have that kind of bunker mentality a lot of times where they think everyone is allied against them. And so they see everything as a potential slight. And maybe sometimes they need that for motivation. Like, I'm going to go out here and show everybody. But if you're on this fight card, if you're anywhere on it, I don't think you should look at it and say that, me being here as opposed to an hour or two later in the night means that nobody cares about me. Not with this one, at least.
Is Aljo versus Movsar a number one contender fight? If we assume Ilya's fighting Volk, I think that seems to be the sentiment. Is it possible that this is a number one contender fight, or is that disrespectful to Diego? Is it maybe the Diego Lopez fight, if you will? Or is it Diego fighting and then this guy has to fight, the winner of this fight has to fight again one more time? What exactly is at stake here in your opinion, PT?
Evloev's in the Belal Muhammad, Leon Edwards situation, isn't he? He is permanently one fight away. And I feel like that's what's going to happen here regardless. Like, you have to just concede that the UFC is really focusing in and prioritizing entertainment here. They don't like Evloev. He has some brilliant wins over some brilliant fighters, but it's about how entertaining these fights are, and that's just one heading that he kind of comes up short on every time. For example, if Nate the Train, who Ben referenced there, and the fight that I'm most looking forward to that isn't being talked about with Doo Ho Choi, amazing fight. If a guy like that comes along fighting like a lunatic and gets on a winning streak, he's going to find his way into a title conversation a lot quicker than someone who, like Evloev, who's systematic and methodical in what he does. And look, everyone's looking at this fight, and it's like, you feel like if either guy is having success, it's probably not going to be the most exciting fight out there. I feel like it's a battle for top position, two great wrestlers. Very entertaining if you're into that kind of thing, but UFC don't seem to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, look, really, top to bottom, there is really something for everyone. Kennedy and Nzechukwu looked great in his last fight against Lucas Bresky. Clay Guida against Chase Hooper. I think 17 years in between the two of them. As far as the age difference, which is just wild. I mean, Chase legit looks like Clay's son, or could pass off as his son. Michael Chiesa against Max Griffin, Cody Durden against Joshua Van, Chris Weidman, Eric Anders at 195 pounds. Randy Brown against Brian Battle. If there was one sneaky storyline that I was looking forward to, it's just to see if Brian Battle can top the post-fight interview that he delivered back in September in Paris, if, of course, he wins, and that's no easy task against Randy Brown, who has looked good as of late. Movsar Evloev against Aljamain Sterling, Vicente Luque against Themba Gorimbo, Dominic Reyes against Anthony Smith, completely flying under the radar, Nate Landwehr against Doo Ho Choi, Bryce Mitchell against Cron Gracie, and then the three other fights that we talked about a little more in depth. You mentioned, Ben, your PME, if you will, and shout out to the CME that you co-host with the great Chad Dundas. Is there a sneaky storyline? Is there a sneaky good fight that isn't getting the attention that you think it deserves?
Well, I'm always going to get excited to watch my guy Michael Chiesa fight. I know you had him on just before us, and representing the Pacific Northwest, so I'm always excited to see him. But yeah, for me, that the Nate Landwehr versus Doo Ho Choi fight is just so perfect for if you're trying to put together a good old-fashioned slobber knocker. You're trying to put together one of those wild-ass fights where you're just going to get blood all over the place and there's not a dull moment. I mean, if those guys ever found a way to get together and have a boring fight, I would be stunned. And I think you want to talk about card placement, I think that one is well placed for that reason, because that is definitely the UFC saying, hey, look, we know that these guys aren't necessarily superstars to the casual fan. You might not even know who they are. You might vaguely remember them, but we're going to put them on here, the first fight on the pay-per-view card, and it is going to get everybody riled up, and you're definitely going to remember it. That one's circled on the calendar for me.
What about you, PT?
Yeah. Oh, it's 100% the same fight. I'll speak
Same
to it
one? You're both
from
picking the same with all these options?
Yeah, Dooho Choi is an unbelievable story. He
is.
came into our lives a month after the Korean zombie joined the military in South Korea. And along comes this other South Korean phenom. 3 knockouts. Then he gets into that violence orgy with Cub Swanson. And he loses 2 more fights via stoppage after that. He then goes into the military service. He only came back recently. Like, he's been here 10 years and he's only fought like 8 times, I think. He's had a draw. And then he went in and knocked out Bill Algeo, who was a very tough competitor. But you add to the fact that they've just declared martial law in South Korea, his homeland, a guy who served the military over there. Like, that is a huge thing. Like, for him to be in the US while all this is going on in his hometown country, unbelievable. It could be an absolutely brilliant story. If he wins this fight and he gets on the mic, potentially says something about that, it could be one of the big takeaways from the fight night.
By the way, been doing this a while. Not sure if I've ever heard violence orgy in describing the fight.
I'm not sure I've ever heard of anybody with the backstory being that they just declared martial law in their country.
I mean,
that's a new one.
Yeah, no, you definitely threw a lot our way. Okay, back to the main. Ben, you first. Kai Pantoja.
You know, as much as I'm excited about the Kai Asakura story and the potential history there, it's hard for me to pick against Pantoja in this fight just because, one thing, we've seen a lot of people who go on to have great UFC careers who do not look at their best in their first UFC fight. To go in there, it's a lot of adjustments there. And one thing that we know about Pantoja, even if you have good moments against him, he is really great at enduring those and getting the fight back to where he wants it and shutting that momentum down. He's a pretty seasoned champion at this point. I got to go Pantoja.
PT?
This is a purely vibes-based decision, but I'm going Kai Asakura.
Again with the vibes. Again with the chill vibes. All right, back to you, PT. Machado Garry, your countryman. Shavkat Rakhmonov.
I'm going Shavkat today.
Wow.
Today.
Just
all right.
Oh, okay. Meaning you reserve the right to change.
Today, I'm feeling Shavkat. He did that interview with you, 10 minutes. I think he said 4 words.
Yeah.
Also, chill vibes to the max with Shavkat, which will play against him, as Ben spoke to earlier within title conversation and whatnot. Ian could probably add a lot more to that, but I'm going with vibes today, and it's Kai Asakura and Shavkat Rakhmonov.
Wow. What about you, Ben?
Shavkat Rakhmonov, that boy good. That boy good. All the way.
Is Shavkat Rakhmonov, in your opinion, both of you very high on him, is he the welterweight champion of the UFC this time next year, Ben?
Yes.
Wow.
And the only thing that stops him is if they can't get the fight put together for one reason or another.
Right.
But I think he wins this one. I think we get that Bilal fight sometime in like the first half or so of 2025, and I think he wins that too.
You agree, PT?
Yeah, I love this lower turret on Air Jordans after putting up with the brackets today.
That's true.
What were we saying there? Oh,
is Shavkat the champ at 170 this time next year, December?
Yeah, like, look, you asked Ben about this. I wasn't worthy of the question earlier when you asked him.
Wow.
You know, who will Bilal prepare to fight? Thing about Ian is he's never fought a guy who predominantly just wrestles, who is a great wrestler. And we saw, like, Bilal, I wouldn't have thought when he first came in, we wouldn't have been saying, like, this guy is a really, really impressive wrestler. But I was there in Manchester. I saw the onslaught he put together against Leon Edwards. And I think that is one of the big question marks with Ian Garry. If you look through his record, there's never been an out-and-out wrestler. There's been great grapplers, like even back in the regional days, like Jack Grant's a great submission grappler, things like that. But an out-and-out wrestler like Bilal, that's one of the big questions that still remains over Ian Garry. I think Shavkat, a lot more used to dealing with those kind of styles. Maybe he hasn't got the big name test like that either in the UFC, so to speak, last fight against Wonderboy and everything. But yeah, I think Rakhmonov causes a lot more problems for Bilal.
Before I let you guys go, and this is non-UFC 310 related. Yesterday on the program, we were talking a lot about Dakota Dacheva and her place in the in the MMA landscape in the top 10 and whatnot. Ben, I just wanted to ask you. We were talking, or I was talking about her being top 10 pound for pound, being potentially top 5, definitely top 5 women's flyweight, face of the PFL. Are you subscribing to all of this hype? And what do you think they do with her? How do they keep her entertained? How do they keep her motivated? How do they keep her happy in the PFL?
It's tough to say at this point. You don't want to get ahead of yourselves. If I'm the PFL, though, I'm kind of looking back at the Kayla Harrison saga that you went through and thinking, what are the lessons that you can learn from this? And maybe they feel like, hey, the Kayla Harrison thing played out the way it was always going to play out, and we got what we could, and then she moved on. But if you don't feel that way, if you feel like you wish you still had Kayla Harrison, you wish you still we're getting that bump in terms of just like Google search and simple metrics like that, then I think you want to apply that here and just think to yourself like, we need to plan for some kind of future, because the problem the PFL runs into is A, you run out of fresh opponents for somebody to fight, and B, it's still in these fighters' heads, even if they're hoisting a big check at the end of the year. Some part of them is saying, I'm tired of explaining to people on airplanes what I do for a living and having to say, the UFC, yeah, it's like that. You have to get over that kind of mental hurdle with some of these fighters, because even if they have a great career with you, they make a lot of money, some part of them is going to say, hey, when I was hitting heavy bags in the gym on my way up, I wasn't necessarily thinking someday I'm going to be PFL champion.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And PT, I know we talked about it at length yesterday on the program. You mentioned this roundtable with Chuck on Crown the Man of the Hat. When is this coming out?
I'd say tomorrow. I mean, I don't rush excellence. Chuck
Sure.
Mendenhall, a fellow mayor of yours, Ben. He likes to take his time. I had it into him yesterday. I mean, if it's still not foiled now, I don't know what he's been doing.
Oh my God! I mean, maybe he's.
Oh, wait, joking. I just said to him a couple hours ago.
Shit, you're just talking shit. By the way, Ben, did you notice that Eric Bischoff was joining us from the Missoula airport yesterday? Have you been to that particular coffee shop?
The Missoula airport does in fact have one coffee shop. So I'll say this: the Missoula airport. Don't sleep on the Missoula airport's free Wi-Fi, because it is among the better airport Wi-Fis that we have. I assumed you told me a big timer like Eric Bischoff was in Montana. I would say, well, he's probably in Big Sky. Maybe he's flying out of the Bozeman airport. But to hear he was actually in fact, newly remodeled and expanded Missoula airport, it's very exciting.
It's all happening there. It's all happening, and it's all happening on Saturday in Las Vegas for UFC 310. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Great fun. Appreciate it. Keep up the great work. Any uncrowned pieces that you want to pitch? We just got Petes's pitch. Ben, what do you have coming up this week?
Yeah, I just finished writing something about just sort of the history of Japanese fighters trying to make the jump into the North American scene, the UFC or elsewhere. Anytime, look, I get a chance to write about Shinya Aoki.
Oh yeah,
the ups and downs of Shinya Aoki. I'm going to do that, but yeah, it's proven to be a tough one for a lot of those fighters coming over. And when we do get excited about somebody, we think maybe this could be the first Japanese UFC champion. So yeah, I wrote a little bit about that, and that should be coming out today or tomorrow. I don't know.
Love it. And of course, The Crack live on Friday afternoon, hosted by the patron saint, the one and only Petesy Carroll. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. Talk to you soon. Thanks for watching this video. Hey, before you go, do me a favor, hit that sub button, give us a thumbs up, hit the little bell thingy as well. Leave us a nice comment or two. We appreciate you all very much.